Good day all and welcome to today's training. We are going to be handling the projects and fixed assets section of the module. My name is Franklin and I'll be conducting the training today. The first part of the training that I want to go through is the project section. So that can be found under the business module. The first thing that we want to do is the setup of the project. So under your maintenance section, projects and job costing, you can go in here. You'll see that I've already got one set up, but for the purpose of this training, I'm going to go through creating a new one quickly. So first thing that you've got to do is you've got to give your project a number or an identifier. So we can call this PRO001, and this is, please hold for me. Can everyone see my screen now?
I can see it.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, I'll start again just to recap. Thank you for everyone for joining the training session today. We're going to be going through the projects and fixed assets module. My name is Franklin and I'll be conducting the training. So the first one that I want to touch on is the project. So when you go into business, under the maintenance section, you've got your projects and job costing, and that's where you would create a new project. You'll see that I do have a project called Stone Valley already set up, but for the purposes of this training, I'll show you briefly how to create a new project. So you'd select new and you'd put a project identifier, and you then obviously name the project, which is dependent on what you're going to be doing. So let's call it building site, and we're going to put for Marbella. You can then link this to a customer. So for the purposes of this year, we're going to select DAB Collision. You can link a salesperson to it. I'm not going to do that at this moment in time. You can then select the different project types, but that's mainly just for reporting purposes. Within the stages, you'd obviously want to create your parent stages. So I'm not going to go into too much depth, but you can have multiple stages with multiple parent stages with multiple child stages underneath. But for the purposes of this, I'm just going to call one parent. And child. Obviously, once you've selected the child, you can then select the parent stage that it belongs to. Your due date, you can select when this project is going to be due by, and then obviously the expected closing date. So let's say that we're not going to run into any problems and we're going to finish it a week early. You can then, for record keeping, put in the actual closing date and the percentage completion. Under the budget section, this is where you can actually apply a budget to the project. So we're going to apply a budget to this project. We're going to select the child, which is your stage. We're then going to select an inventory item that we are going to be using in this year. For the purposes of this year, we are using bricks. And we are going to use 20,000 bricks for this job. We're going to estimate that it's going to be 38,000 Rand cost and 50,000 Rand revenue. Now, at the top, you can select the number of months that this project is going to take. That there just enables you to then split up the progress along the bottom. So if we're going to be doing it in 2 months, in month 1, we estimate that because we're already halfway through this month, that we're only going to get 25% of the job done. and the other 75% will then fall under month 2. Payment schedule is where you can make notes on what the planned payment schedules are for your client as to when they're going to be making payments. You can then create it and you can put in the amount and the percentage and the date that it's due on. Any other notes you can put in here. If it's not estimated, you can then have an actual date that is recorded. Contacts, you can add contacts to the project as well as a problem log or a project log. You can also add site surveys, files, photographs of the site, any sort of evaluation documents that you have in here, you can use in here. Under the optional fields, you can then use these fields in for whatever purposes that you require, for additional information that you need on the job. And that's just for record keeping. Any notes that you want to process on the job, you can process there. Resources, this is if you are allocating an asset to the job site. So for argument's sake, you have a truck and trailer that are delivering the assets, the bricks to the site, you can then select that asset under your assets and assign it to the job. Financial, you can then put in any sort of insurance, guarantees, or other contracts that are dependent or this project is dependent on, and we can then create custom reports for you in regards to what those costs are. If you want to use a checklist on your job, you can use it. So you can have a project plan and a kickoff date. We're going to use those there. Now, these here don't automatically populate there. What you would need to do for that there is in the control panel, under your options section, if you go to your projects tab, checklist, these are now optional fields that you can then add. So if we want to add a new one, we can then select field 3, and we will put here a site survey. We're going to make this a date field. Once we save that there, it'll now be populated within the job. So if we go back to our projects and we go back into that specific project, if you go to the setup, you'll see that now my site survey is now populated there. Once I tick it, I can go back to the checklist. Project plan, this was set as a text field. So you can say meeting held with the client. The kickoff date, due to inclement weather, we only presume that we're going to start on the 28th. And then the site survey was done on the morning of the 29th, for argument's sake. So those fields then get populated in, and we can then move on to the actual processing within the project. So when it comes to the processing of the project, the easiest way is to process it through your accounts payable and accounts receivable, and go through the purchase order, the quotation, purchase order, and then off to the purchase invoice. But for the purpose of expediency, I'm just going to go straight into a purchase invoice. I'm going to then select cables and wireless, and from them I'm buying my bricks. So I select the bricks that I want to purchase. I'm buying 10,000 bricks at this moment in time at a cost of R1.90, and I can then record. Now, it's important to note that what I've set up in here is that once you record, it's not going to automatically pop up or prompt you to select a project. So what you would then do is go to the project tab, and then you can allocate your project to it. So you'd hit the binoculars, the 2 projects that we've set up will come up. You select the project that we are dealing with. You then select the stage in which we are dealing with, and you hit record. That will now record this document into the project as the expenses relating to it. If you wanted the pop-up to come automatically, you can go to your options, under the Projects tab again, under Purchases, if you select that tick box, now when you want to process the document, you'll get an automatic pop-up. So let's try that again. We are now going to go to Dexter, Drew, and Angus, and we are going to purchase the bricks from them. We're going to purchase an additional 10,000 bricks. Once we record that, because we've selected that the project must be prompted, this screen then comes up automatically for you to then select the project. This is very helpful if you are processing everything to a project. However, if you are not processing everything to a project, I would suggest you have the item unselected. So now we want to process the sale for this project. If we go to the accounts receivable, we can then process the sale or the invoice to the client. The client was Dab Collision. We are now selling the bricks. We're selling them at £250 each, and we are going to be using the 20,000 bricks that we purchased. Because I have now not selected the pop-up on the accounts receivable section, we would have to go back to the projects icon and allocate the project manually. And that is the long and short of the processing side of the project. However, now we can get into the reporting part of it. So if we go back to the business module, down at the bottom next to the business menu, we've got the business reports, and we can then run the reports on the project. So we select our date range. I'm just expanding the date range to make sure that we do include everything. If you want to have all your projects or a selected project, you can select all your projects there. Selected project, you can then select one or more than one by holding down Shift or Control. And if you've got many projects that fall beyond the scope of the screen, you can then search for it through the search function. You can then also obviously filter by all buyers or selected buyers, and you can filter by the stages. For the purposes of this year, I'm going to run it with all of them. And once the report populates, you will see that we have the invoices that are coming through for the purchase of the bricks at the bottom, and then the sales of the bricks are coming through at the top. If you have any invoices that you're worried that have been not allocated to the job, you can run the missing allocations report. You once again select the date range that you want to identify your missing invoices in. And once you run that there, it'll then populate with all the invoices that have been processed in the company that do not necessarily have a project assigned to them. One of the most beneficial ones to run is the actual versus budget. So if you remember, we set up the budget a little while earlier. We would run this at a specific date. So we can run it into the future to catch all the expenses or all the income that's come in case you've processed an invoice into the future. You can then also select your individual projects or all your projects, or once again, if your list is too long, you can identify it just by using the search function. Once this then populates, you'll then get a much better idea and feel as to what the actual costs are as opposed to the revenue. You'll have your actual, your budget, and if there's any variance. And then again, on the revenue, you'll have your actual and your budget giving you a variance. Now, for this specific project, I did not include an actual revenue amount, and that is why you'll have a variance there. You can then also run your checklist report based on the projects that you want to select. I do apologize, that report did not want to pull through correctly. And you can also, if you had assigned your assets, so a truck or a trailer or whatever, to your project, you could then run your report based on that there. Unfortunately, I did not assign anything to it, so the error comes up. But what we can do quickly is go into one of the projects, and we can then assign a resource to it. So if we go into DAB collision, go to resources, and we are now going to assign, let's pick the Toyota Hilux. It'll now say that the date that this was assigned was on that date, and when you pull the asset back, it'll then be pulled off the report, or it'll still populate in the report, but the date that it left will then be displayed on the report. The next module that I want to go through, sorry, can I ask, are there any questions in regards to this module just before we move on? Okay, moving on, we're going to go into the fixed assets module. Now, under the fixed assets, there are two different ways of bringing your assets into the company. Obviously, the first would be to purchase an asset. And secondly, if there was any assets that were purchased into the company previously that now need to be added into the company. So if we want to have a look at the assets, if you want to add an asset that was previously purchased, you would hit the new button, and you can then populate this here with the details. You would then select what the asset type is based on the asset types that you have set up, which we'll go through shortly. You can then allocate it to a cost center or a project if you want. You can also purchase multiple assets at one time. So if you go into a computer store and you buy 7 laptops, you can then allocate all 7 laptops all at once. Under the purchase information, you can then link it to a vendor if you have the vendor set up onto your system. You can then put the purchase date, so you can run this purchase date into the past. You can then include other additional information as to insured value, the salvage value, and the replacement value if you want to track that information. We would obviously need to populate the purchase price, and then when you want your depreciation to start running. So if you have already processed depreciation manually, and you are going to input the depreciation under the depreciation history, where you would then select your different values so that you can then populate your previous depreciation, then you would not necessarily want to run the depreciation from the onset or when you purchase the vehicle or the asset. You can then say, well, I've already processed the depreciation up until the end of April 2023, so I only want to start depreciating on the 1st of May 2023. Under the repairs and maintenance, you can then select different expenses if you want to allocate those expenses against the asset. But once again, this is for all your historical data, because I will be showing you how to process an expense against the asset going forward. Then the location is just if you want to limit it to a location. Optional fields is if there's any additional information that is not covered by the standard fields that you want to populate, you can use that. Any additional files that you want to load up, so it may be a purchase contract, a hire purchase contract from the bank, maybe you've secured it through a personal loan from a best friend, you can then store those documents there so that they are safe. Once that asset is now recorded, you'll see that it has been added to the asset register. If we start from the disposal reasons, this is for when you want to dispose of an asset. You may have different reasons for it. I've just set up one saying just plain simple disposal, but you could have different reasons. So you could dispose of an asset to the staff, in which case you give them a staff discount, or you ensure that there's no profit or loss on the asset. Or you may have whatever reasons it's disposed because it was in an accident, it was stolen, it was damaged, well, damaged beyond repair, whatever. You can then add those there just by simply saying new. You put in your new code and you can say what the reason is or the description. Under the expense types, I briefly mentioned it earlier that I was going to show you how to process expenses against it. So currently I've set up that any repairs to a vehicle will go there, but you can add whatever expense you want to it. So you can add services, repairs, general checkups, fuel costs, labor costs, or driving time. You can add all those expenses here as different expense types. Then your depreciation methods, you can set up multiple different depreciation methods. The two that I'm going to be using for the demonstration of the depreciation is the depreciation 20% fixed, which I've set up to be a straight line basis with a 5-year period for the lifespan of the vehicle. However, our company policy is that the initial value is written off by 20% when you take possession of it. So the first time you run your depreciation, it will take 20% of the value off straight away, and the remaining 80% will be what is depreciated over the following 5 years. This is key for items like motor vehicles, where the minute that you drive them off the showroom floor, they have got a substantial amount that is written off. And just to account for it within your accounting program, we've accommodated for it here. The tricky part is that SARS doesn't always agree with that methodology. So they will give you a standard wear and tear rate, which is what I've set up here, which is just plain straight line basis, and the entire asset will be depreciated over a 5-year period with no initial percentage calculated, which is in line with the SARS regulations. Then the asset types, this is where you would set up the different classes of your assets, so land and buildings, computer equipment, your motor vehicles, furniture and fittings. You can set them all up here so that when you purchase your assets, you would then allocate them to the different asset types. Now, I have shown you how to bring in an old existing asset. Let's quickly show you how you can bring in a new one. So if you go to a purchase invoice and we want to purchase a delivery vehicle from, let's say, Lexington Masonry. All you do is you have your journal code for the asset at cost. Once you select that there, you select the quantity and obviously the price. Let's say that we're purchasing this one for 100,000 Rand. Upon hitting record, you'll be prompted to now allocate the asset into the asset register. So we're going to call this DEL005, and it is a old delivery van. We're going to assign it to the motor vehicle category. We're not going to assign it to a cost center or a project, only buying one. I'm going to populate some information into these fields just to have some sort of information there. And you can then obviously include a image into it as well. So you could take a picture of the vehicle just so that you can see what the state was when you bought it. Purchase information, you'll see that the vendor has already been populated, as well as the vendor invoice number and the quantity, the purchase price of the vehicle. Now, because we're buying the vehicle, we're not going to be putting in any historical depreciation because the depreciation will be calculated on this value going forward. Once we click OK, because I had set up the project allocations to come up, it's now asking me to allocate it to a project, but this is not for a project, so I'm going to just cancel that pop-up window. This asset is now allocated into the asset register. And if we go into our reports and we go with an asset listing, we can then see that the old delivery van is now present in the company. The next step that we want to cover is in regards to running depreciation on the asset. The depreciation will run for the very next period. So you'll see that when I want to populate the depreciation, it is prompting me to depreciate 30th of November 2023, and that's because for the purposes of reporting, I ensured that we had numerous depreciations that were run so that we could have some information that would be populated into the reports. All that I do is I click on the depreciation icon at the top, and you'll see it then populates all the different journals that would need to be made. If you want to see what the total of the 39,583 is made up of, you'll then go down and you'll see that each individual asset has its own individual depreciation that is being calculated, that's being posted to the accumulated depreciation, and then the debit to the depreciation account. The same can be seen for the other asset type that is set up, which is the 2-ton trailer, and there it is there. Because I have set up the two different types of depreciation, one based on our internal company processes and one based on the SARS wear and tear ratio, you'll see that these figures are drastically different, but that's because the depreciation is calculated in a completely different method in regards to the wear and tear allowance by SARS. So this is just so that you can have a fixed asset register that at the end of the year, when you need to do your wear and tear to depreciation breakdown, you can just print out the two fixed asset registers and you'll be able to compare the two to see where the differences are between the assets. As soon as I hit record, it'll prompt me as to whether I want to post this journal now. It'll then populate the journal screen. All that is needed to be done is to make sure that the values are then correct based on the initial screen that we saw, and for you to verify that this journal is to be processed. Once you record it, this journal will then be processed and the assets are now depreciated for that period. One of the key things about the comparison between the normal depreciation as well as the wear and tear rates that I mentioned earlier is you can see this in your fixed assets register. So once again, you just need to make sure that you've selected your date ranges, because I have been processing in a number of different date ranges. So I'm going to select a very wide range. If I run it for the book value, you will see it will populate with the depreciation based on the depreciation that was processed in that period. However, this is based on our company's internal processes and is not necessarily in line with SARS regulation. So if you redo the report based on the tax value, it'll then repopulate, and you'll see that the figures are once again drastically different, but these would then be in line with your SARS requirements. So all you would need to do is do a simple export to Excel, compare the two, and that would be your wear and tear adjustment that you would have to do on your tax return at the end of the financial year. If you want to view the depreciation that you have processed in the past, you can then select a period. So let's say that I want to look at just the month of April, and I want to see the depreciation on all my assets or selected assets, depending on your preference. You can run it, and then this will give me a description as to what the depreciation was that was run on the assets. So at the time, the only assets that were in the vehicle were this bucket, this cherry picker, and a passenger vehicle at cost. And these are the depreciation rates that were run in that time. You'll see that the tax value was not populated because at that time the tax value was not set up. We can redo this report, and we can select for the month of December, which is the depreciation that I have just run. I do apologize. It wasn't December, it was November. And here you'll see that you've got your book value items that are coming through based on the journal that is written to your fixed asset register. But then you've also got your tax value, which is written based on your wear and tear values. So you can then quickly compare what the difference is between what SARS has allowed you to take and what your internal company process has been. You can obviously then run reports on your purchases, disposals, and your asset summary or your asset listing just to get you more information on your assets. I have not discussed the disposals with you yet, so let's run through that quickly. Asset disposal. To dispose of an asset, all you need to do is click on the asset disposal, and you can select which asset it is that you want to dispose of. You say that you want to dispose of a motor vehicle, a Toyota Hilux. We want to dispose of this vehicle on the 3rd of May 2023. Disposal reason: it was in an accident, was damaged beyond repair. Proceeds: well, the insurance is going to pay us out 55,750 Rand. You can see that what will be written to your ledger is a loss of 44,250. If we were in fact selling this share just to someone else and we then sold it for 112,500, you would see that the profit would be written to your ledger at a value of 12,500. Once you click on dispose, I do apologize, it's asking for a disposal date that is greater than the session date. So we can just move that. That's not going to work, sorry. Okay, obviously you need to dispose of the asset after the last time that you have processed your depreciation, and that is what that error was. So just changing the date to post-November. That way we are making sure that we are disposing of it after the last depreciation will then allow you to dispose of it. Once again, it will then populate the journal that needs to be processed. All that you would need to do is verify and record, and that asset is now no longer in your asset register. Are there any questions on this module? Okay, I'd like to then thank all for joining us today. And if you do have any further questions, please can you send them through to support@palladium.co.za, and I'll get one of my consultants to address it for you. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.